Welcome to week 2 of the Nebraska MTSS 5-week SEL summer series. The 5 webinars cover 5 interdependent topic areas, which are adapted from our Nebraska MTSS SEL Systems Development training offered by the Nebraska MTSS team and serve as a complement to the core SEL training provided by Nebraska MTSS. Last week, we brought you Adult Social Emotional Learning and Professional Culture. And today, I'm excited as George Toman, the Nebraska PBIS coordinator, is with us again and will be bringing you today's conversation around social emotional competencies. Our hope is that today will be as interactive as possible, considering the webinar format, and would ask that you participate as you can during our discussion times by entering your comments and thoughts into the chat, as well as questions you may have into the question and answer box. So sit back, relax, and get ready to launch into week 2 of SEL learning in Nebraska. Take it away, George.
All right. Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we're still getting a couple participants coming in, so that's really, really nice. As Amy said, my name is George Toman. I serve currently as the Nebraska PBIS coordinator and used to serve as the Nebraska MTSS regional leader out in the Panhandle. So nonetheless, it's good to be back. Last week, for those of you who were here, you got a chance to see me and Laura Barrett go at it with adult SEL, and today we have SEL competencies. And so I'm hoping that you'll be able to grab something from this presentation that you'll be able to bring back with you to your classrooms, to your buildings, to your districts in preparation for the school year that is ahead of us. I also want to make a quick shout out. We do have a couple of our Nebraska MTSS members as part of the panelist crew, Christy Fedden, Casey Herner, and Jane Byers. All of them will be also assisting me in this presentation. So if you see or hear their voices come on, it's not some ghost or anything. It's a planned thing. So with all that said, if you would go to your chat really quick, I have put 2 links in the chat for everyone to access. We will be using the first link here very shortly, and then we'll go to the second link near the end. But I just wanted to get those links to you right now, so you can go ahead and click them, get them on your screen. And for those of you who maybe get bored of some of the stuff I'm saying, you can just play with some of these links and see some of the information because it's good stuff. But nonetheless, it's in the chat for you, and I'll put the links in the chat a couple times as well, so that way if anyone new comes on, you'll be able to access that no problem. So with that said, I want to quickly go through our learning objectives for today. And similar to last week with our adult SEL and professional culture, this week we're going to look very specifically at SEL competencies and their importance in not only building the culture like we did last week, but how it impacts our students. We're going to look at ways to be able to look at pro-social behaviors, look at how to build positive relationships. We're going to go through Castle's SEL competencies and integrate them into multiple different areas so that you'll be able to walk away with something to be able to assist you with your schooling come the fall. I apologize. I had to take my picture and I can't get my phone to figure out what's going on. So if you see my little headshot over there in the corner, don't worry about it. That's just my computer going a little bit weird on us. And lastly, with leadership, really important, one of our essential elements within Nebraska MTSS is shared leadership. And we will spend near the end talking about what good leadership and what a good environment can do to support educators to build on SEL skills. So with that all said, I want to quickly remind you of what we talked about last week. So for those of you who were attending last week, you will remember that we talked about adult SEL and professional culture. And we really stressed quite a bit that adults are the primary agents of change. Adults are the primary agents of change. Similar to academic instruction, we ask our teachers to model the instruction. We ask them to model how to do problems and how to think about certain situations to our students so that then they can replicate that and then be able to perform the achievement necessary. The same goes with social emotional learning. Simply putting a program in front of our kids, simply just saying, oh, I went to this conference and now all of a sudden I'm good at SEL and my building should be good at SEL. That's not entirely true. We need to be able to look at SEL as something that's a process. And it's a process that's going to take some time. It won't take forever, but it will take a little bit of time. It's going to take some intentional, proactive measures to be able to help our adults grasp what we're asking with social emotional learning so that then we can have our students be able to look at that as well. Now, with all of that said, I want to quickly share that within all of this, so not only with looking at what makes up good SEL, we also need to look at it within that problem-solving approach, meaning that we just don't go into a conversation and then just start trying to figure out, oh, let's go ahead and do SEL out of nowhere. Anything good that happens in school happens as part of a system, which then the driving engine becomes your problem-solving process at every tier of support. So when we talk about social emotional learning, it's not just about the program. It's not just about necessarily what we do. It's about who we are and how we go about managing all the different layers of support using that problem-solving approach. And you're going to see that again in our presentation today regarding how that problem-solving approach can be used within social emotional learning. We do have our materials and our presentation on our LaunchNE website as part of our re-entry procedures going into the fall, and I have left the link here for you. But again, with our 5-part series that we have right now with our summer SEL series, you will get recordings by simply accessing that website at a future date once the recordings are in. And last week's that we've already done is available or will be available, so then you'll be able to simply watch it at your leisure or share that with your staff, whatever the case may be. Again, this information is for you, and so please take it and use it as you need to. All right, so now what I'd like you to do is I'd like for you to go to the chat. I'll put the links in here one more time in the chat for those of you who may have entered a little bit later. Please access the SEL Competencies link. That should lead you to a PDF that has this model in front of you and then explanations of that below. And in fact, I'm going to exit my presentation here. So I'm going to pause really quick. And then we're going to go right to that on my end. And then we're going to talk about this together once I can find it. There we go. All right. So again, you should have this in front of you. So on my screen right now, you should see the PDF, and then you should see the second page. And again, this comes right from the CASEL website with all the different core competencies. And so I wanted to make you aware of this first off, because again, this is free material. So you can simply go to CASEL's website, go to this link, and provide this to your teachers and staff, no sweat. Or if you have someone who's very interested and say, hey, what is this social emotional learning about? This is something you could easily give to someone and be able to get some very basic but thorough information, I will say. I want to go to the first page, which is the model. Now, if you were at last week's presentation, you remember we talked about this a little bit, but this week we're going to hit home on it a little more. When we use the word SEL competencies, social emotional learning competencies, primarily we will be looking at these 5: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. These serve as the essential 5 core competencies, if you will, and we borrow this from CASEL. There's some other groups out there, researchers, et cetera, that have different competencies they've either summed it up a little more expanded, but when you look at the literature overall on a very broad stroke, these 5 really, really cover it. And so we're very comfortable sharing that these 5 kind of be our essentials. If you notice with this model, social emotional learning works on these 5 competency elements. And then if you look, you have the different circles that expand from that. So we start with competencies, and we help our adults and our students together. It's a very restorative for-with mindset, not to students. We work on SEL with students. And we focus on working on our classroom, again, adults modeling, students mastering these skills, which then, as you see in the model, expands out to schools, and then eventually gets out to the community. And similar with anything in education, in a model like this, everything is interdependent of one another when you really think of it. So if we really want to get really good social emotional learning practices in place, we provide that strong evidence-based curriculum and instruction in SEL. And then from that, we have these school-wide procedures that are able to maintain this SEL component as not only something that we do with a handful of people, but we do it with everyone. And then from that, we build partnerships within our community and our families that go hand in hand. And as that happens, then our families and communities, they absorb this message where, hey, my local school is working on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, etc. And then from that, that helps our work because then it complements what we do at school. And most importantly, it hits home to our students. So as you can see, it's a nice kind of a dance, if you will, right? Where if we were to lead the way with social emotional learning, which is usually the case, schools are asked of that, as many of you know, then that message gets expanded out to our school, to our district, and eventually to our community. And then, as many of us know, to some degree, it may not be on a large scale at first, but then that good effort starts coming right back into the classroom where the community starts embracing some of these things. The schools and districts really start embracing it, and then it generalizes because then our students get to receive that benefit as well. And with social emotional learning, you don't really, as you can tell, don't have to be a quote unquote expert to really get the general gist of how to manage some of these things. Now, going to page 2, if you will, these are examples of the social emotional competencies and definitions. So when we talk about what are these individual competencies, this is what we're essentially talking about. And if you go to CASEL's website and in other places, you'll see a little bit more related to all these 5 areas. But what I would like for you to do now, and we're going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes for this, please take a look at this second page, the social emotional learning competencies. And then in the chat, what I like for you to do is comment on anything you find interesting, number 1, or number 2, what are some things that you're already doing in your school that's already meeting some of these areas? Go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll keep quiet, and I will, about a minute in, I'll go ahead and speak out whatever is in the chat box. So go ahead and do that for us now. So first words in the chat, we build relationships with our coworkers and students all the time. One of the things that we always have to remember is that in education, our primary currency is our relationships, right? Those are the things that ultimately get us to where we want to be. And so the more that we invest in relationships, the more powerful and opportunistic of a time we have to be able to actually provide the impact that we want. Appreciating diversity. Next comment that was said, very, very big. And I would also argue that in the next coming months, being able to actually appreciate diversity is huge, because of simply of the kind of team, the day and time they were in. So thank you. Some of you have already said you touch on a lot of these, but it'd be nice to have some kind of curriculum or something, be able to cover your grades 5 to 12. Circle of friends. For those of you familiar with that, especially for our students with autism, circle of friends, powerful relationship development tool, relatively easy to get accomplished when you get through the training and stuff, but very, very, very good there. Thank you. The interconnectivity of all of the components. Yes, the one of the nice things about this model from Castle and also from other models that we know too with social emotional learning is that they work off of each other. They're interdependent. They're not codependent where, you know, you could silo something and get away with it. That doesn't really happen here. There's a lot of interdependency going on, and as you build on something like responsible decision making, you're probably going to also help out with self-awareness and self-management, right? And then a lot of other combinations too. So very good. Have a good number of comments talking about second step. Very commonly used here in Nebraska and in other parts of the country as kind of your core curriculum towards social emotional learning. Very good. More comments on social awareness. I like it, especially in our context of today and going forward. Very good. We have someone mentioning that they teach high school journalism and they see almost every one of these competencies in the work that they do in class. Very, very good. Yes, I'll say very openly that the more that we're able to look at how what's already within these competencies that we already kind of naturally do with our curriculum and our studies, the more that, again, that interdependency, it helps generalize the behavior at the end of the day. So very, 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 very good. Very good. I like this comment here. While interdependent, these do seem to be developmental, and the instructor will need to be socially aware to successfully teach. Very, very nice. Very, very good comment. Yes. Very, very good comment. We'll hit on that a little bit more too. But yes, when we think about social emotional learning, especially, it's going to look a little different with our young 3-year-old child compared to the 19-year-old, right? But how we go about it and everything being developmentally appropriate, we can still accomplish these core competencies, whether it be 3 or 19. So very, very good. All right. No, thank you. Well, very, very good to start us off for today. Very, very, very good opening chat here. So I'm going to go back to my slides here, but again, I want to quickly remind you with this resource, you can easily just keep the link and be able to share that with whoever's interested, right? It's right on the CASEL website. This isn't something that Nebraska made in particular, but again, similar to a lot of other states and districts and schools, this is really good information. And so we'll go ahead and capture that there. So that is, in a nutshell, those social emotional competencies and the explanations per. So then when we think about adults, going back to kind of our core intention of, what at the end of the day, why do we need to look at adults first and really emphasize that to be able to help our students? Well, a couple points here that I would like for you to consider. Teachers who exhibit good social emotional competencies, those skills, not only in the classroom, they're modeling, but also maybe more importantly in their life. They have an increase in being able to form positive relationships. They're able to connect with students as a way to enhance the disciplinary approaches. You're able to look at, with a teacher who exhibits social emotional competencies, they're able to actually proactively intervene rather than be more reactive. And they're able to really help students as they learn some of those self-disciplinary strategies. And there's a bunch of other things out there too. But one key piece with social emotional learning is this, and it was mentioned at the beginning of the chat here in our previous activity. At the end of the day, our place in education is really building relationships. Whether that be that really young kid or that kid that's about ready to graduate, whatever the case is, The relationship is vital. It's imperative. It's not important. It's imperative. Social emotional learning is a great means to be able to gain the skills to be able to make that happen, especially with maybe our toughest kids, because having these social emotional competencies, being able to not only model them well, but also being able to share with our students how these things impact our lives, gives them an opportunity to not only embrace the message, but also realize, hey, this person who's a leader in my classroom, which, by the way, remember, all of our students see us as leaders, whether we like it or not, right? This leader is showing me a way of how to be, how to live to a certain extent, giving me skills to be able to move me in my future. And I might have a tough time with a peer. I might have a tough time on my Snapchat or my TikTok or whatever the case is with someone else, and I don't know how to go about it, but my teacher is able to share with me this self-awareness skill or this responsible decision-making skill that, oh, I could probably use that here. And even as we teach it and as our kids do it, if they start getting positive momentum with this stuff, then it kind of floods the whole building, right? Because good things usually kind of flow out. So you got a couple kids that are embracing it, all of a sudden they'll talk to their friends and then they'll start doing that too. So there's a lot of good gains to have. But again, it's all about having us as adults first being able to grasp onto that first. Because going back now to our slides, if we don't have good social emotional competencies, we run into some issues. We are more now, this isn't like guaranteed, correlation. I want to make that very clear, right? So the idea that, if you lack social emotional competency, you're guaranteed to have these bullet points and many others. That's not the case. But you're more susceptible. That's what we're saying here. We're more susceptible to some of these things. One of them being you're going to have conflict with colleagues and families. You might have a negative classroom environment if you're not careful. So again, think about those SEL competencies, one of them being self-awareness. If I'm not taking good care of myself to be aware of my feelings and emotions at a certain time period, I don't know about you folks, but I know that I could snap very quickly if a kid demonstrates a behavior that I really don't like. I'm a school psychologist by training. The one behavior that always drove me nuts was spitting. I was more of a secondary school psychologist, so I got those, hey, Mr. Tolman, and the loogie comes out. And those are the behaviors that really, again, clench my fist like, oh, and I had to be self-aware of when I see that behavior, how was I going to act? Because these kids that I was helping with, dealing with, if you will, if I emotionally got into them, not only do I run the risk of totally dismantling any relationship that we built, but obviously there's also job implications there too. Now, in our time right now, going into the fall, with all the uncertainties, with the pandemic and everything else going on, there's going to be a lot more instances where there's a lot more stress involved. And because of that, having those social emotional skills help kind of keep us guarded so that we don't do those behaviors that might very well hurt us long term. Now, one thing I want to point out especially is at the bottom, this bottom bullet point. If you lack social emotional competency, you're more likely to become burned out, cynical, and stressed. One of the things that we know in education, without having to go into too many details, is that we're facing a huge shortage. Some of you are already feeling that. And it's only going to get worse based on the projections that we're seeing. Now, obviously, we're trying to make gains to be able to try to get ahead of that. But that's not just, a 6-month or 12-month project. It's going to take a little bit of time. And so every teacher, every specialist, every janitor, every cook, every administrator, whoever steps into that building is a valuable asset for our students, and most importantly, is a human being that we should cherish. And so by having social emotional competencies and making it proactive, as we mentioned last week, and now we're mentioning it this week, being proactive in our approach to be able to help our people, at the end of the day, will lead to better results. To where rather than being burned out, cynical, and stressed, we might still be very tired. We might still be very frustrated at things, but at least we'll have skills to be able to move us forward and move us forward in a way that will help us out, compared to the other way where we go to maybe alternatives that are not so helpful. So social emotional learning, when done well, really leads us in some good areas that we can help improve not only our students' well-being, most importantly, but also for ourselves, so that then it's a cooperation amongst everyone, so that we can have a really nice culture. Take a quick moment, if you would, and read this quote to yourself. And as you're reading it, what I like for you to do is, especially on the bottom, that last italicized line, in the chat, just share what you're thinking. So go ahead and do that. Oops. Sorry. There we go. First comment on the chat, and I love it. Our actions speak loudly. I would 100% agree. I'll even expand on that little point too, that in times of crisis, people follow the behavior of the leader first and then the vision. And so when we think about us as staff, that we are all leaders to these children, they look at our behavior first before they hear what's coming out of our mouth, especially in times of crisis. And so that's huge. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Many others are mentioning that too, about reflecting in our actions. Very, very good. I love this comment. Reiterates that our own self-care must be first. Preach. Yes. In order to serve our students. And let's also be very honest with ourselves too. The self-care piece, just in the last, again, 4 or 5 months since we've been hit by the pandemic, obviously we've had to really, we in terms of self-care, find ways within the limits that we're given. And so especially going into the fall, finding those opportunities to be sure that we're taking care of one another in that self-care. One thing that we mentioned last week that I think is really big is that if respecting one another's time. So if you're having meetings or trainings, whatever the case may be, showing to everyone that, look, we're going to start on time and end on time, because that's a great way, a nice little way to show everyone that you care. And that goes a long way for us adults. Be authentic. Love it. Be models. It's one of those things where, again, if we can appreciate the fact that our kids see us as those leaders and as those models, all of a sudden, what route are we gonna take? Are we gonna be helpful in our actions or not so much? And so, very, very good. Thank you for the comments, everyone. Great. Really quick, the SEL committee, as part of the Nebraska MTSS team, as they've made these presentations, we also have a number of resources, and this is one of them. They've created a personal assessment and reflection link that it's a Google form that you can simply just use. But I will say, though, that before you do that, to please reach out to your regional lead first. Just because, number one, it'll just make life a little easier for you. And number two, maybe we can have some kind of collaboration there to be able to help your district out. But I just want to make you aware of some of the resources that our team is currently working on very diligently in terms of responding to our needs coming up. But again, there's a personal self-assessment reflection tool, and I'm sure you can find others across the internet too, but this is one that we have. But I want to spend a little bit of time on this. So using your data. So once you kind of figure out, all right, where are people at? Now, again, in our first presentation, and if you missed it again, it's recorded, but we talked about the importance of collecting the data and making a decision on that. We're doing that again here, simply put, because the data is really, really important. Now, again, you may not have all the quantifiable measures in SEL. We have things like SEL screeners and those kind of things, but for adults and everything, you may not have everything at your easy disposal. So always remember that with social emotional learning, just having good emotional intelligence about how your building is doing is really, really important. And so when you look at this little model, we got this from our friends in Kansas. A few of us went down to Wichita and went to their MTSS conference there. I believe it was back in September 2019, and found this really, really useful and decided to bring it back. And one of the nice things about this model is that it kind of shows you the interrelationship between the conversations that happen at the district level to then your collaborative teaming at the school level, which then informs the district team and how there's a nice flow. So really quick, as you can see, you have your district leadership team there on the far right. They have their conversations, and on our case in point today, we're primarily talking about social emotional learning. And then it goes to your building leadership teams. And then the representative from that district team, that's leader of that building team, shares the information, wherever the case may be. And then they have their collaborative meeting and conversation, et cetera. And then those building leadership teams, whatever that looks like, transfers that information down to your collaborative teams at the school level, at the classroom level. And then you have a conversation about that. But then with the collaborative teams, there might be something that comes up that, hey, maybe we can improve upon this, or maybe we need to think about this more, or this is going really positive. So let's be sure that our whole district knows about it. Can you go talk to, your people, the building leadership team, and be sure to share that? And so then you see how the process goes. Building leadership team, someone grasps that information, shares it to the full team, and then the representative from that team goes to the district team. And again, you can kind of see the interconnection. Now, I will say that all of the preparation literature that's been put out with social emotional learning in the last couple of months, and especially going forward in the next month, you're going into reentry, they've all talked about this importance of that collaborative networking, that teaming, to be sure people are talking to one another, not only in the school building, but also at the district. Now, coming from Western Nebraska not too long ago, for myself, again, you might be in a spot where, George, my whole building's K-12, right? Right. But the concept still stays the same. You may not have your collaborative team per se, because your collaborative team is also your leadership team, because you only have like five staff, 4 or 5 grades or whatnot. But still, there's a conversation that's going on, and that's the concept that we're talking about. So whether you be one of our larger districts in the state or one of our smaller, this model can be used so that as you talk about that data, as you talk about all those things, everyone's voice is included, everyone's perspectives are trying to be brought to the table, and you use data to help inform you. So again, something that we wanted you to walk away with here. You'll also see this leadership slide as part of some of our core trainings and some of our coaching as well, and that we try to emphasize this a lot as a Nebraska MTSS team. When educators become aware of their social emotional competencies, they're able to meet the needs of some students. If you want to get better, if you're able to reflect on those competencies and identify your own strengths, you're able to meet more students, because now you're starting to get into a deeper reflection of yourself and those competencies so that you can share that experience with your children, whatever grade you may be teaching. But then where you get the most bang for your buck, and then that true equitable mindset, if you reflect on the competencies, identify your strengths and your areas of struggle, your areas needing improvement, and then have some kind of plan, whether that be personal or professional, whatever the case may be, to grow, then you can meet the needs of all students, because that modeling of behavior for yourself and the culture that you have set in the building and district, hopefully, if you really want to get it well, goes into being able to appreciate all students, because of reflection, being able to look at your strengths and weaknesses, and then making some kind of proactive effort to get better is exactly what we're asking our students to do whenever we have them go through the second step curriculum, whenever we have them do any kind of character build, whatever have you, that's what we're asking them to do. So as we experience it ourselves and grow, our kids see that, and they also embrace that as well. And the nice part is it's a nice relationship too, right? Because as we start growing, our kids grow, they grab some stuff from us, and we learn something from them. I know for me, being a secondary guy, some of the best lessons that I learned in my young career were dealing with my students who had emotional disturbance, the really hardcore behaviors, and they inspire me because of all the stuff that was going on in their life. Some of them still wanted to try to be better for themselves, and for me, that was inspiring. So again, it's a back and forth piece, but as we get that, if we really want to be serious about meeting all students' needs, we need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So that's kind of the essence of this slide right here. This whole presentation, similar to our other adult presentations, are based off of our core SEL trainings that if you're curious about what those are and those kind of things, you can ask your MTSS regional lead. Some of them we're still working on. Some of them are very close to completion and ready to get out there in the front lines. But this is part of a bigger series. So these are highlights, if you will, of more training and support that you can get. In this, we talk about the neurology of connecting the competencies with how our brain functions. And I'm not going to go into a full spiel about this, but I do want to bring up a very important point to help us kind of hit home of what's going on. So as a quick reminder for us, when our brain develops, starts from the cerebellum, bottom of the neck, goes up, and then the very front here, this prefrontal cortex area, is the last to develop in full and fully mature. So again, back, our balance, everything comes up, and then the very front here is the last to mature. And depending on what you read, it could be 19, 20 years old, maybe a little bit more than that, before this is fully mature. In this area holds most of our executive functioning capacity. Those things like judgment, being able to problem solve, those kind of things. This is why, when you think of it from that developmental standpoint, if you're 3 years old and you have a situation that you don't like, your immediate reaction is throwing a hissy fit or crying, probably a combination of both, because you don't know what to do with yourself. Even when we get older, right, that gets more difficult. It gets difficult because of how our brain matures. But again, this is the last really to develop. So when we think about then stress, so saying all of that now to get to this point, in our brains, whenever there's a potential bad thought or something that goes on, those thoughts pass into the prefrontal cortex. And then our brain starts asking, how are we going to react to it? Are we going to fight? Are we going to flight? Are we going to do something else? Okay. And one of the nice things about social emotional learning is that if we're able to help a student be able to know how to try to use this part of the brain early and often, we help form this part of the brain, just like we do with academic skills. We help form this part of the brain to be able to do executive functioning things, judgment, emotion regulation, etc., in spite of all the things going on. And so, but when that doesn't happen, the brain and its chemicals and the synapses and whatnot, they start trying to adapt to whatever the brain's used to. So if we're not good at handling stress and our environmental, if our environment's really stressful and a bunch of other things that we're not trying to kind of control, if you will, what happens in this part of the brain with what we're capable, then all of a sudden the stress gets really bad. And for those of you that know trauma-informed practices, I don't have to get any more farther to be able to tell you kind of what, some of the things that happen when those things really, really get bad. But the nice part about social emotional learning, again, is that whether we be early childhood, and folks, this is one of the reasons why early childhood, we're real big fans of, because the more that we can help our students have these social emotional skills, which is a big part of the curriculum in early childhood education, the more that we set them up to be able to handle all the different troubles that come up, if you will, in their learning and social lives. Because let's be real, the more that you get older, right, the more that you're asked to comprehend, the more you're asked to know. And there's a lot of things that change, and then add to it all the social pressures like social media and a bunch of other things. It's not fun being a kid growing up in this world today. So being able to, on the full continuum from pre-K all the way to graduation, and graduation for some may not be 18, be 21, being able to encompass SEL learning on that whole spectrum. And I'm not even talking about being sure you have a program in there, obviously. I'm talking about just bringing these core competencies to the front, having your culture embrace these things. We've helped these students be able to use their brain and its capacity to handle whatever's coming, to be able to then give them that learning, that education, which will then eventually help them moving forward. It's nice to remember that just like good reading instruction is healing to the brain, we can make an argument that good social emotional instruction and practice helps our brain in the mental health area a long way. And so keep that to your, for your use, because I think that's really, really big, that we can actually have some tools in our toolbox very early in the game to be able to get ahead of some of the issues that some of these kids might run into just by virtue of what we got going on today. School-related stress. Don't really need to go too much into this bullet point here, because many of you, I think, could share a lot about some of the things that stress you out in schools. Our profession is, by its very nature, because it's relationship oriented, is going to bring a lot of stressors. Let's just be real. We're not behind a cubicle teaching kids. Even in a virtual setting, you still have kids you got to care for, and they're looking at you as leaders and they're looking at you as guidance. And so there's a lot of stress going on. And so having these social emotional learning competencies being put in and in the forefront proactively help get ahead of these. One thing that I think we could do a better job of a lot is, if you look on the left side, the bottom point here, continually asking, am I doing enough for students? If there's one question that I wish some of my educator friends could kind of be a little nicer on themselves, if you will, is this one. Because we'll have conversations of, did I do enough for this kid, because the kid, didn't meet expectation and whatever, and they're just pounding themselves. And though there might be a point that maybe you could have done a little bit more, overall, you probably did the best you could in that moment with the energies you had. And so don't knock yourself down so much, because at the end of the day, our kids will pick up on that and you're just going to hurt yourself. And so understanding these stressors and being able to use our competencies to be able to counter them is really helpful, especially going into the school year that we're about ready to face. When we talk about stressors, we also like to talk about mindset. And many of you know Carol Dweck's work in terms of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I want to share a couple of things with you here that also fits well with our social emotional learning that maybe we take for granted. That third bullet point, repeated failure will cause a decline in effort, leading to negative self-expectations that grow year after year, resulting in a fixed mindset. A practical example that I don't think we do a good enough job remembering is that when we think of our students, especially those students at the highest tier level of support, the intensive needs of support, this bullet point is huge, because usually what happens, and again, some of you might have different experiences, which I'd be very thankful for, but in my young career, when we have a student who doesn't do well in tier 1, we start giving them a tier 2 intervention. That doesn't work out. Let's say it's like a violent behavior of some form. And so then we put on a specific tier 2 plan where we kind of spice things up, and that still doesn't work out. Then we have other teachers and other people frustrated that we've had 3 plans, tier 1, tier 2, tier 2 plus, that didn't work. And then we get to that tier 3, whatever that looks like, special ed, non-special ed, whatever. And all of a sudden now everyone's like, what? This kid's still going to throw chairs. This kid's still going to throw the F-bomb. This kid's still going to spit on me. So what's the point? And some of you who have been in those conversations know what I'm talking about. Where when we get to that most intensive level of need, especially when we faithfully go through our MTSS process, there's a lot of conversations sometimes on why should we do something else when I already know the answer. And that when that conversation or thought comes in, that's a fixed mindset. Right? That's a fixed mindset right on its own. And so one of the things that we can do as educators to help counter that, and it's hard to do, but to help counter that is, regardless of wherever we're at, there's always an opportunity to get better. So one thing I know, like with behavior plans, thinking now pretty intense here, but nonetheless, bear with me. When we're thinking of behavior plans, if I have a kid that cannot stop using curse words, cannot stop cussing, and we try to teach that replacement behavior of rather saying the F-bomb, say French fries or something. I don't know, something like that. Even though the kid might still have a really angry verbiage coming out, and even though the kid might, be real tense, if they're able to say French fries rather than that really bad word, yes, that's improvement. And I know that sounds very little. I know that sounds very, maybe, lack of a better phrase, elementary, even though that's not really right to say. At the end of the day, that's huge. Because that replacement behavior, rather than saying a really tough word, a really bad word, having that replacement behavior and being able to accomplish it means that, hey, I can control some of these emotions. Yes, not all hope is not lost because I can fix it. And now we can have a better perspective going forward. And that, again, is tough to do in the time period because sometimes the behaviors get pretty tough. But when we think about mindset, again, the more intense the need, sometimes the more vulnerable we are to get fixed mindset rather than growth mindset. And so something to think about as we go forward, because the more that we're a fixed mindset, the more that those negative stressors really kind of start getting to us. In the chat, if you would, I have 7 scenarios there for you, and some of you might have already seen this before. But I want you to take a look at each of these mindsets. And in the chat, if you would, just simply put which ones are growth mindsets and which ones are fixed. So we'll just spend about a minute or so. And so if you go ahead and in the chat, mark out which ones do you believe are growth mindsets and which ones do you believe are fixed mindsets. Already got a couple comments in. Very good. Very, very good. So, and keep coming in with the chats, but I'll go ahead and say right now, a lot of you have already said it. So the first 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are growth mindsets. 5, 6, and 7 are fixed mindsets. And one of the nice things about remembering the mindset conversation, especially when it comes down to stress and SEL core competencies, is that when we think about growth and looking at things that we can always get better, the more that instills hope in us. So like go to number 2, every teacher, no matter who they are, can significantly improve their teaching ability. Being able to say, you know what, we can improve and be better for our kids, that's a lot better attitude than, well, that person's been here for a while, or this person doesn't know what the heck they're doing, so we'll just wait for them to leave. There's a huge difference in the attitude and the culture that's built when you embrace the first piece, which is everyone can get better, especially if they do it together, compared to the second, which is you're walking on eggshells, and our kids catch on to that very quick. And so thank you for the comments. Again, 1 to 4 are growth mindsets, 5 to 7 are fixed. And this is also a nice little activity to do with your staff if you ever, want to have good conversation about the growth and fixed mindset. Really simple, these 7, and going from there. So very, very, very good. Very, very good. So then when we think about training the brain for growth, these are a couple of examples here. But what I would like you to do in the chat to kind of keep our conversation going is think about things that you can do in your building to help promote that growth mindset. Things that you can do in your building to promote the growth mindset. If you could put a couple of those in the chat. Again, read some of these comments to help maybe stir the brain if you need to. But what are some things that you can practically do very quickly to help prevent a fixed mindset and encourage the growth mindset? And as you start putting them in the chat, I'll shout them out. Focus on improvement rather than grade value. First one, thank you. You can be a really smart student and have like a 95. What's stopping you from getting a 97 next time? Or if you're a kid that maybe on that significant IEP where you're working 3-4 grade levels below where your peers are, hey, you're able to count here perfect. Let's go ahead and maybe skip a little bit and be able to kind of work through. Huge. Again, growth mindset in both scenarios. Very nice. Great comment. Adding the word yet. You haven't mastered it yet. You're not proficient on it yet, meaning always giving that hope, a true Carol Dweck phrase, giving that hope of, hey, it's coming, just not right now. It's coming, and I'll be there with the way. So thank you. Awesome. Encouraging new things and seeing failure as a learning of what not to do. I would also see using those opportunities of failure as a learning opportunity rather than a destination, if you will. So very good. Actually practice with staff. There we go. That one might take a little bit of guts to do, but yes, write down some fixed mind ideas and then help turn them around, what that could look like. One of the things that we face in special education all the time, unfortunately, is this fixed mindset. By definition, since this kid has specific learning disability, they're not supposed to do well in reading. Yes, I know, maybe appalling for some of us in here, but it happens. It exists. Some people actually trying to make a defense of it. And it's like, you might have a little bit of a point in that, yes, they're significantly below than where their peers are, but guess what? They can still learn. And they still have a great opportunity, so let's find ways to make that happen. Very good. Failure as a path to success. Thank you. Very good. Nice comment here. Principal allowed the teachers to be able to go observe other teachers. And not only in the sense of instruction, but also social emotional learning integration too. So very, very good. I like this last comment here. Teaching profession as a journey rather than a destination. The road is better than the inn, I think Cervantes once said. And so very similar piece. And that the more we see it as step by step rather than can we get to the destination the quickest, the better. So very good. Great examples, everyone. Great examples. Thank you. So we're going to keep going here. Growth mindset to practice. So we will, maybe even to the point of ad nauseum, keep showing you the problem-solving model. And we're unapologetic about that, but it's really intentional. Because if we don't have a good problem-solving process in place, there's a very good chance that we're not going to have constructive meetings or constructive conversations to be able to help remediate needs or embrace our strengths, to put it plainly. And so we won't go into a reflection here on this, but one thing that you might want to take back with you, and this could even be a nice little drill to do with your staff, is think about your problem-solving process, whatever that looks like. Again, we've demonstrated our basic problem-solving model that we share within our core trainings and in other areas with MTSS. But if you have your own problem-solving process that you've embraced, go ahead and use that. And talk to your teams very intentionally. How can we have a growth mindset in every step of this process? How can we have a growth mindset? And I will also say, what can we do to help each other keep away from the fixed mindsets? So have a conversation about the growth mindsets, how at every single stage you can have the growth mindset. And then on the other end, looking at what can we do to prevent one another from getting into that fixed mindset. And so the example I just gave about 10 minutes ago, I'll bring it back to the forefront. That whole concept of the more that we kind of go up our systems of support, the easier temptation, vulnerability it is to actually have a fixed mindset, just because we've probably had to that point of a lot of failed interventions in the eyes of many. And so one thing that we can do is that in our team meeting, whatever that looks like, especially if it's maybe a problem-solving meeting for a student, we can easily talk about, look, we got this plan, we have this strategy, that's great. But one thing that we really need to do is that if any of us start talking about this kid as, oh, he or she will never get better, if we start saying that our staff cannot embrace the accommodations or being able to successfully go through this plan as a leadership team for this student, we need to hold each other accountable and say, no, that is incorrect. This is what we'll do instead. That's a challenge, and it's hard to do. That's not an easy thing, to say the least. No one said social emotional learning was going to be, quote unquote, easy in real time in these tough situations. But to keep reminding ourselves that the more that we can stay growth mindset, the more that we can actually put some control into the situation that we're walking into, the better chance we have to not only help the student, but also everyone around that student. So again, as a school psychologist, one of the things that I always ran into, and I know my administrator ran into, and others on our special education team in order to help a significant needs student, is there would be conversations of, this kid cannot do what you're asking, and so what's the point? Or as long as I just do A, B, and C, I can get away with this and they'll get off my back. And being able to have those honest, good conversations about, no, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to do a better job looking at the growth mindset. Again, that not only happens with those individual teams, but most importantly, it needs to be embraced by the whole culture, right? But when we think of that problem-solving process and a growth mindset, again, it gives us more hope. It allows us to be able to see students as being able to be on a good path, rather than setting them up for something bad, right? Or as what sometimes happens is, what do I have to do to get them out of here? We're able to put those roadblocks in by just simply having a growth mindset in the problem-solving process. So again, something, especially going into the fall, something you might want to consider going forward, just to be able to kind of help you out, especially with some of you having to deal with our most significant needs in terms of our buildings and our schools, be able to help you out going forward. We embrace modeling the social emotional learning for students, but also modeling it for staff. And so going back to even our presentation in week 1, going to here, having those opportunities, whether it be in those collaborative teamings or even your staff meetings to a degree, challenging one another to say, how can we model good social emotional learning behavior for staff? One thing that always comes up into my mind, and again, it's difficult to do, but I think it's good to try, is if you see a staff member who seems to be coming to school early and leaving late and really not being productive anywhere in between, challenge that staff member, hey, what can I do to help you here so you don't have to be here so early and so late? Asking them, hey, what kind of support can I give to be able to help you? And maybe more importantly, if that conversation doesn't necessarily go well or doesn't absorb, being sure that the other staff members are doing that, where they're trying to find quality time, not only in school, but also with their families and their loved ones, whatever that looks like. And so then being able to model for everyone, this is the kind of behavior that we want to have, because we're not just professionals. We're also husbands, wives, we're mothers, fathers, we're caretakers, whatever the case may be, we're all of that. And so let's embrace everything, which means that being able to model that for staff becomes a very huge part of what's going on. Near the end of our presentation, we will not go into this a lot, but in the chat, and I'll put it one more time just in case if there was someone who wasn't able to get on, but the Center of Great Teachers and Leaders have this nice little interactive SEL in practice piece. And I'm not going to go through it here. You can do this on your own time, but it's really simple. If you ever wanted a little 15-minute activity to introduce SEL to your staff, or even to a board member, or whoever the case may be, or even if you wanted to, I don't know, go on your social media and just put it on there and have people look at it, copy paste this link. Seriously, every area, the teacher social emotional competencies, the SEL teaching practices, and then the student competencies, it shows the interconnection, something that we've been trying to do today in our conversation. And then all people have to do is look at it and get some ideas and then talk about it. It's a really nice thing. This is also part of our core SEL training, so you'll see this again if you try to get that as part of your building, district, ESU, et cetera. But something we wanted to give you right now as a heads up, because it's a good resource and it's a nice conversation starter. So something for you to have, and please be sure to take a look at it before you leave today. Last thing I want to quickly share, and really it's summed up in the quote below, but when we think about leadership in particular, how can we help lead people, particularly our peers, to be good investors, if you will, of social emotional learning and be able to embrace that for our students? Okay. We have those basic strategies, again, modeling it, being able to, check in. Again, the power of just reminding someone that you care for them, or you did a great job in this meeting, you did a great job in that classroom. Those little things are huge. One of the things we talk about in PBIS training is that not only do we need to be 4-to-1 positive corrective ratio to our students, but we need to do it as adults too. Because that one negative is going to reign in our brain the rest of the day, and it's going to take maybe 4 to 7 to help counter that, positives to help counter that. And so we need to do the same. Find those good things in our peers that we can embrace, and then we'll be able to also demonstrate that with our students. And the last quote, and I'll just read it out loud because I like it a lot. Don't ask if you are leading, you are. Don't ask if you will make a difference, you will. The question is, what kind of leader will you be, and what kind of difference will you make? And this comes from the book Leaders of Learning. Some of you may already have this. My two favorites, DeFore and Marzano, combined together to make this book. It's a really nice book. But think about that. What kind of difference will you make, especially going into what we're about ready to walk into with our school year? And so with leaders, again, embracing that and being able to keep on to that is huge. So lastly, and we'll cut it off for today, Here's all the contact information. Again, the slides will be up on the website probably in the next 3 to 5 days if you want, but contact your regional lead if you wanted some different information on SEL. There's our main state contacts as well. Remember that next week we have Educator Self-Care, 4:30 p.m. Central. Please be sure to log on and be able to look at that. We'd love to have you on. We had about, I think at its apex, about 63 total people here today. So very, very, very good turnout, especially in the summer. We appreciate you for taking the time to spend time with us. And remember, our NeMTSS Summit is virtual, and we'll have information on that very soon so you know what that looks like, and it is completely social emotional learning focused. So with all of that said, we are out of time. If you have any questions for us, you feel free to put them in the chat or stay on a little bit, but otherwise we are done for today. So thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. Have a good rest of your week, and we hope to see you again next week for Educator Self-Care. Bye-bye.